like my mom's friend. I'd be like, oh, she's got a thyroid problem, I need to call her. And I'm like, I'm not calling my mom's friend and telling her she has a thyroid problem. But it would just like go higher and higher. And then I would finally call her and she would, like, she said, oh, I've been having all these symptoms. I didn't know where they were coming from. I'm going to have some blood work. She got her blood work done, and she was already on thyroid medication, but she was being poisoned by it. Like the level was too high. And the reason that she got it checked was because I called her up out of the blue and was like, hey, I don't want to tell you this. I don't want to get in your business, but there's something going on with your thyroid. And so that kept happening. And eventually I thought, well, maybe if I do this professionally, then like it doesn't have to hijack my life.
Hello, everybody. Eric Taylor, BigEAstrology, back with another episode of my Knowledge is Love Astrology Podcast. And this one is 224 with my amazing guest, an intuitive life coach, a Reiki Master, and a veteran professional astrologer. I introduce and welcome to the show, Miss Laura Bruno. How are you today, Laura?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Well, I'm so excited, and we'll get to the audience soon about how you and I connected and met, because I think that's a very fascinating story. But I want to start off with you in terms of being an intuitive life coach and a professional astrologer. What type of coaching do you do, and how do you help guide your clients? Is the coaching separate from the astrology, or do you combine them?
I often combine a lot of things with astrology. So I got into doing intuitive work after a 1998 brain injury. I was actually on an academic track, and then I was always very intuitive, but I couldn't do anything else after the car accident. And so it like rerouted my life, and I started doing intuitive work because I had no filter. It just, everything was constantly coming in, and I would get horrible migraines, and they would just intensify until I started telling people what was coming through for them. And so, and then the migraine would get better. So it was like shock therapy, like forcing.
Whoa, that's really deep. So you're saying that it was almost like God or the universe was like increasing the pain of the migraine so that you would then be pushed to kind of guide and speak the truth to people?
It was exactly like that. Yeah.
Wow.
And it started more with medical intuitive information. So I would, like my mom's friend, I'd be like, oh, she's got a thyroid problem, I need to call her. And I'm like, I'm not calling my mom's friend and telling her she has a thyroid problem. But it would just like go higher and higher. And then I would finally call her, and she would, like, she said, oh, I've been having all these symptoms. I didn't know where they were coming from. I'm going to have some blood work. She got her blood work done, and she was already on thyroid medication, but she was being poisoned by it. Like the level was too high. And the reason that she got it checked was because I called her up out of the blue and was like, hey, I don't want to tell you this. I don't want to get in your business, but there's something going on with your thyroid. And so that kept happening. And eventually I thought, well, maybe if I do this professionally, then like it doesn't have to hijack my life. And it doesn't, if I do it voluntarily.
You feel like you're being weird to other people, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So when I started doing it professionally, then people started coming to me instead of me having to approach them and be like out of the blue, hey, you have cancer, or hey, you have this. It was like people are coming to me to try to understand what's going on.
Wow. So wait, I want you to share with the audience, because you've kind of had like a couple of kind of close NDEs, and I want you to share that with us. But what's interesting, the way that you're explaining and describing this, do you feel that it's just getting like this like download, and then you're like all of a sudden the information comes like, oh, so-and-so may have a tumor in their breast, or like how does the information come? And is it like, let's say I booked with you as a client, right? Do you see things in their chart or do you have a questionnaire and then they tell you the information and then you get the download about them?
I don't use questionnaires.
Okay.
It really depends on the client. So sometimes people are like, "Oh, are you clairaudient or clairvoyant?" And I'm like, "Yes, all of it." And
All the clairs.
the way that it comes to me though tends to be, you know how different people have different learning styles.
Yes.
So like some people are more auditory, some people are more visual. So if somebody's very visual, a lot of times it will come to me as a visual. I'll be like, "Oh, I'm seeing like a black mass around this area or something." Or I'm like seeing a movie of something that is related to their health. But then other times, if somebody is more auditory, a lot of times it comes as a catchphrase, or I'm like told to ask them a question. A
Wow.
lot of times I will see someone's chart in my head, even though it's not an astrology reading. They've booked an intuitive reading. And I'm like, "Hey, do you have your natal stuff?" Because I'm just like, if I get a hit that your astrology is important, then it usually is. And so then I'll pull up the chart and it will like underscore whatever I was just saying. And so it kind of depends. But I started out as a medical intuitive and then kind of gradually expanded and expanded. And my now ex-husband, so my first husband, he was older than me and he did life coaching and intuitive work. And at some point he got very bad Lyme disease. And so he was very often having to like cancel sessions at the last minute. And so instead of doing that, we gave people the option, like they could have a session with me for 15 minutes longer than they had scheduled with him. And at some point he said, "Laura, why don't you do life coaching?" And I was like, "Why would I do that?" He was like, "Because you were coaching all my clients." And so I had kind of like unintentionally taken over his coaching practice.
Oh my gosh.
So yeah, that's just kind of how my life works. So.
Well, that's so fascinating. And so just to share a little insight, Laura is a Virgo rising. I'm a Virgo sun, so we definitely connect there. And I have a son with a Virgo rising. The Aquarius moon, which I love that, right? And it's next to your Jupiter, but I love that energy because I have like a monthly astrology meeting and I call it Astrological Coffee Talk with Eric, but it's my 11th house crew. And I tend to collect Aquarius moons because I have the big Virgo stellium in the 11th house. So I think there must be some connection there. And then you've got the Gemini sun, Mercury, Venus, all that fun stuff. So for you, I want to kind of go back because maybe we could tie this in and I'll just let you go on for a while, right? Share your early childhood NDE experiences and then kind of bring that forward to how it connected for you and I meeting and what's behind, how we met.
Okay. So I have never officially died, just to be clear on
Right.
that, but I've had a lot, and I mean like a lot of close calls and out of body, not coming to after anesthesia. I mean, just a lot. And also a lot of shared death experiences. So somebody's dying 2,000 miles away and like I go through the experience. That's happened many times and it's always validated. It's often with someone that I'm close with, but not always. I've had it where, I woke up in the middle of the night. It's like my chest is radiating, white light and I'm feeling all this energy around me. I'm like, wow, someone's dying right now, but I don't know who it is. And then the next morning I'll have a session with someone and it was supposed to be about something else, but like their grandmother died the night before. And I'm like, oh, okay.
Wow.
She went in peace. She's in a good space. Like I had this experience at this time and it'll turn out that it's the time that the grandmother died. So, but yeah, as a child, I had terrible colic. I was like a month late. They would have induced labor, but I think I was waiting for that Sun, Moon, Pluto grand trine. But
oh yeah, we're gonna talk about that.
but yeah, so I was not a happy kid. I was like, I had horrible colic for 9 months, and then I threw myself off a changing table and never had colic again. It was like it completely evaporated, and from that moment on, I was very psychic and always was able to talk with the dead. My grandfather died when I was 3, and like I didn't know it wasn't normal to continue interacting with him. And so I didn't really miss him. Like everyone around me was crying and, really upset, and I was comforting everybody. But my grandfather, meanwhile, was giving me information in my dreams all the time.
Wait, can I ask you a question about that? This is really fascinating to me because do you remember what sign your grandfather was? Because you have Neptune in the 4th house and he died when you were 3. So your annual perfection year is the 4th house for that Neptune. And the fact that you guys were able to continue and talking. Now, was this also your mother's father?
No, it was my dad's father.
Oh, so your dad's father. But that's really powerful. So, like, do you know what sign he was?
I am 90% sure he was a Libra. I think his birthday was October 6th. But, that's interesting. I should do his chart. I've never done his chart.
Yeah,
that would actually be very fascinating.
Definitely. Okay, so go back to that connection. Now, was your grandfather obviously you were so young. Was he the first person that you saw or communicated with from the other side?
As far as I know.
Yeah.
So when I was born, I was like really, really aware anyway. I mean, there's a funny story in my family that my grandfather picked me up after I was born, took one look at me and said, "This one's going to be trouble because she notices everything." And so, I mean, maybe that's why I had such bad colic as well. Like I was just overstimulated constantly. So yeah, he died when I was 3. I have vivid memories of hanging out with him, until he died. So I mean, very early memories of him and I remember when he died and like my dad and my mom and my grandmother were sitting on the couch and I went up and I was like, "What's wrong?" And they were telling me that, grandpa died and I was just like, Cancer South Node nurturing everybody. But yeah, I mean, I would lose things. Like I remember I had like a favorite little baseball cap or something. And this was when I was maybe 6, but we used to walk to a little playground that was near our house, my mom, my sister, and I, and I lost my hat. And I started having dreams that the hat was under this particular evergreen tree that was on the way to the park, but it rained for like a week. So we didn't go to the park. I was like, Mom, I got to go to the park. I want to find my hat. And my grandfather had come to me in a dream and said, "Don't worry about your hat. I've got it covered." And so we were walking to the park the next time and I was like, "Oh, I have to stop by this tree," Grandpa said. And there was my hat underneath the tree. It was like not damaged from the water or anything. It was right by the trunk. So
wow, you just gave me chills with that because I mean, parents a lot of times, and I say this, and I'm sure you do too, to a lot of my clients or all of them, don't dismiss your children when they share things, with you about other dimensions, other realms, or people that have passed on, or seeing spirits or ghosts, because obviously the first 7 years we're still very connected to, right, our past life or our past incarnation or to God or heaven, and you got to believe them. Like for so many generations, right, we just, "Oh, silly kid, no, that's not true." And now I tell people, no, listen to your children. Like, you know what I mean? So when you said that though, and then you found it, did that kind of like shake up Mom's perspective of your insight or not?
My family sort of was odd because I mean, I was the weird kid and I was always having these weird experiences. I had very psychic dreams from a young age. And I mean, my dad was a physicist, but not like the cool kind of physics, right? Like he was like very nuts and bolts kind of physics. And my mom, I mean, she was technically Presbyterian, but she was pretty fundamentalist as far as Christianity went. So a lot of fear and a lot of doubt was what I grew up with. Yeah. But at the same time, I mean, I didn't know what was normal or what wasn't. And so I was just pretty unfiltered, sharing things and asking questions. And I found out many years later, this was after my brain injury and everything, but like an ex-boyfriend told me this, that he called my dad one day and they had a conversation and my ex was like, "Hey, I just want you to know that your dad actually trusts what you say a lot more then he lets on. And apparently they had this conversation, and my dad said, well, if Laura said that, the sun wasn't going to come up tomorrow, I wouldn't believe her. But if 2 suns came up tomorrow, I would be like, yep, she knew something was up. So it's like he wouldn't acknowledge, but at the same time, like there was so much stuff that would keep coming up that they couldn't totally say, oh no, there's nothing to it.
Well, it's almost undeniable, right? Like if they start seeing these patterns, and this sweet little girl is just like, oh, this and that and that, and then it's just all playing out. Like you're kind of like, who the heck did your mom's like, who the heck did I birth? Like,
yeah.
Well, that's pretty awesome. So, okay. So continue on, because I want to see like from that, because I know there's like maybe another NDE, and then how we got connected.
Oh yeah. So there were a lot. Like in high school, I used to pass out all the time. I've had multiple head injuries, but they weren't serious, but like concussions or things where I would like pass out and hit my head, and then I'd have an out of body
experience. Pass out from what? Was there like a condition or a health issue?
I had a really fast metabolism, like so fast. And I mean, I was not anorexic, but people thought I was, because I had to eat such a phenomenal amount of food. So I would do cross country races, and like by the end of the 3-mile race, I didn't have any more calories in my body. I would drop over.
Oh my goodness.
And then I had a number of things. I mean, I would get very overstimulated, like lots of visual stuff. I do have astigmatism, which we know now, but I didn't know that at that time. And so I think just, all the information coming through. I mean, I have 4 planets in Gemini. It's just like a lot coming through. And so I would just get overwhelmed and pass out. And but that was a lot of hits to the head. And then in, my senior year of college, I was supposed to have all 4 wisdom teeth out, and they did the left side, and they were so impacted that it was like a 4-hour surgery or something. It was like ridiculously long.
Wow.
And they never got to the right side. And I didn't come out of the anesthesia, and I was out of my body, and I heard the doctors and saw the doctors like giving my dad all this paperwork, like, you're going to have to sign stuff because, she may be staying in a coma. And I was like, oh, hell no. And I like got back into my body. And then.
So you could hear them talking about you.
Oh yeah, I could see myself lying on the table, and I heard them talking, and I was like, okay, yeah, I'm not coming out. It's okay. And then I heard coma and like hooking her up to machines, and I was just like, oh no, I don't want any part of that. So I was like, I'm getting back in there. And so I got back in my body and woke up, and they're like, oh, she's awake. Never mind.
That's amazing.
And then so I have a master's degree in English literature, and I got it at University of Chicago. It was a 1-year program. I hated it. And I thought it was because of University of Chicago. And so I thought, well, I'll take some time off. I will, have a sales job. I'll earn money. I don't have to live like a grad student. And then I'll go to graduate school at a different school. And so I applied to a bunch of other schools. I took 2 years off, and I was in the schools. I had the scholarship, the fellowship, all of it. But I started having all these dreams. This is not your path. You are not supposed to do this. And I was supposed to quit my sales job, withdraw my application to graduate school, do spiritual work, become a landscaper and a poet. And I was like, yeah, no, like, that's not going to happen.
With all that air energy, you're like, no, I don't think that's it. But you know what though? It's fascinating because sometimes, right, we'll get pulled somewhere or some way that we don't think that is really truly us. And then if you kind of go with it, you may find out, right? I always say when we get uncomfortable and we're open to change and growth, that's where God works the miracles. And then, hey, you became all that and more, right? So now you do some landscaping as well?
I'm a big organic gardener, and in our last house, I basically like turned it into a farm. So yeah, I have fulfilled the landscaping component.
I love it.
I have a permaculture design certificate, and yeah.
Okay. Okay.
So yeah, I kept having these dreams, and in retrospect was having dreams about losing my rational side, although I didn't know what that meant. In the context of the dream, it just seemed like very surreal dreams. But then I woke up one day. I was on a business trip, and I was in a hotel, and I woke up and I was like, if I leave the hotel today, I'm going to have a car accident. And I was like, oh, but they already think I'm crazy. Like, I can't call in sick and say, oh, I can't leave the hotel today because I'm going to have a car accident. And so then I was like really insistent. Yeah, you're not supposed to have this job, and you're not supposed to go to graduate school. And I was like, if it's so important, just make it happen. And then I said, the poet John Donne's, I'm a nerdy English major, right? So I like traveled with, literature anthologies. And so I read John Donne's Holy Sonnet 14 as a prayer. And it starts out as, batter my heart, three-person God, for you as yet, but knock. Now I'm spacing on it. Probably because I don't want to say it, because I don't want to summon it. But in any case, I said this out loud, and it was basically like a challenge, it was kind of, because as much as I had all this intuitive stuff that would come through, I had a really strong rational side. I mean, it was like a problem. And so I was constantly like at war inside myself, and I would get these crazier and crazier intuitions, which always end up coming true. Right. But I didn't want to believe it. And I also thought, well, I have more control. It's my life.
Well, and let me ask you, because you probably felt like, and I don't know at this time, did you already know your natal chart or no?
No, I thought astrology was ridiculous. I wasn't interested in this at all.
Because you were so heavy mental with the Virgo rising, right? The grand air trine, Pluto, Libra, Aquarius moon, Sun in Gemini. Mm-hmm. For you, heavy mental is just like, that's every day, right? So yeah. I could see where you were like, oh, this intuition, it just needs to like take a nap and leave me alone, right?
Yeah, pretty much. And I mean, I would follow dreams. I would get very often, so my sales job that I had, prior to the one that I had when I had my car accident, I was working for Canon, selling copiers and fax machines in the Philadelphia area. And that's a brutal industry. Yeah. And it was awful. And I had to make all these cold calls. Well, we were supposed to make 25 cold calls a day, and I'd get to like 7, and I was like, I'm going to die. Like, this is horrible. And so, but I had a quota, and I couldn't live on the base salary. So I was like, what do I do? And so I started praying. And what would happen is I would go to drive out to my territory to do my cold calls, and I would get lost, which is very common for me. I would get lost, but I would wind up somewhere, and I'd walk in, and they'd be like, oh, thank goodness you're an angel. So instead of being like, get out of here, no soliciting, they were like, oh, you're from a copier company? Our copier just broke, and we have a huge project that needs to be done in 2 days. What can you get? And I'm like, oh, I can get you a loaner. And they're like, we don't even want to do like a whole search. We just want to buy from you, get a loaner in here.
So this would be a random place that you weren't intended to go to?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So I was rational, but
that almost reminds me of your kind of like a little bit of the it's not exact conjunction, right? But the moon, Jupiter, Aquarius, 6th house of our work and daily routines. Like those blessings, those fortunate things would just come as your moon is like traveling around for work, right? And then all of a sudden, like, boom, like you show up and like, oh, here's some abundance, and here's some like, that's pretty like almost literal. That's amazing. Oh,
yeah. So yeah, like I was very rational, but I was also very aware that there's times where prayer and intuition are like my survival. I couldn't do cold calls the normal way, but because I just, kept getting lost, I'd like say a prayer, and then I'd get lost, and I'd show up at the right place at the right time. I didn't have to do 25 cold calls. I just like showed up where I needed to be, and people are like, oh, it's so great to see you again. I'm like, I've never been here before. And like, nobody would believe me. and they would just, buy whatever I was selling. And so
Oh my gosh. That's amazing. I love that.
So yeah, I sort of like threw down the gauntlet on the day of my car accident, where I'm like hearing consistently, quit your job and you need to withdraw that application to graduate school, like all of it. And I was like, no. But then there was this little part of me that was like, well, if it's so important, just make it happen. And then it happened. I mean, I was stopped at a red light. I drove super carefully, but I was stopped at a red light. I was the third car in line, and the light turned green. I remember seeing it turn green, but the cars ahead of me, they were still stopped. And then I heard this squeal of brakes and a really loud crash. I looked at my clock. It said 1:11. So it was like 1:11 p.m.
Oh my gosh.
And I thought, wow, someone really got it. And then I woke up to all these honking horns, which I thought was my alarm clock. It took me a while to figure out what had happened, because my car was really far ahead of the woman who hit me. Like, she like scooped up my car and threw it forward. And
so you weren't even aware that you were the car that got hit?
No.
You didn't feel the impact?
I don't know.
Wow.
I got knocked out.
So what happened?
So eventually I could tell from my rearview mirror that, this woman behind me she was like waving her hands. She was completely freaking out. And I was like, oh, crash. Oh, okay. She hit me. And so I pulled over, and she pulled over too. And she was like, oh, I want to see your license and registration or whatever. I was like, what's that? And so she kept asking me, and I'm just like, going through the glove box, like throwing stuff around. And I was like, just, you take it. Like, I don't know what you're looking for. And so she went through my glove box and pulled stuff out, and it was for work. And so I was required to call the police. So I called the police, and it was like, I don't know, it was like a street that was an entrance ramp to a highway. So initially the wrong jurisdiction was called or something. So it took a long time for the cops to get there.
Oh my gosh.
And when they did, they were like,
totally this woman's fault ramming into you.
Oh yeah,
right?
she ran into me. Yeah. Yeah. But it was unavoidable is kind of my point. Like, I was like, if it's so important, make it happen. And I drove like perfectly. And then, I wake up at a red light, well, it wasn't red, but there was a red light that I was stopped at, and, this happened. So, yeah.
Wow.
So, yeah. And I knew as soon as it happened, I was like, oh, this is it. Like, this is, like I said.
But how did this change you emotionally, physically, and spiritually?
It destroyed my rational side for like 4 full years. I had no rational side.
Now, did they have to take you to the hospital and all this stuff?
Not initially. They really wanted me to go to the hospital. And of course I should have, but it's very common after a traumatic brain injury that like you don't want to go to the hospital. You just want what's familiar. And so I was walking and talking. I was talking nonsense. But
now, did your head bang in somewhere in the car? And did you have any like bruises or blood or anything?
Back of my head, so the occipital lobe, and I had a really bad whiplash injury. So initially, because it looked like there was no damage to my car, it was just like my bumper was kind of scraped. I was driving a Saturn, and right.
and it happened at 1:11. Like, oh my gosh, Laura.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
Did you bring up that chart already? I know you did.
Oh yeah, I have. And it's spooky. I mean, it really, I had an astrology reading done before I really studied astrology, and the astrologer was just like, wow, you could have stayed in the hotel room that day and the ceiling would have fallen on you. Like, that something was going to happen.
Yeah.
And after I looked up at the chart, I was like, oh yeah. And it tracks with all of these other NDE charts that I've been studying as well. So, no, I drove home from, it was like White Plains, New York. I intended to drive to my house, but I wound up at my parents' house. I have no recollection of the drive, other than I was like passing through a toll booth. I think it was like Newark, New Jersey or something. I was passing through a toll booth, and I was like, wow, I'm really messed up. If I were smart, I would go to the hospital. But I was like, no, I'm not doing that. And then I woke up. I was driving, which is scary, but I sort of came to, and I was like, oh, I'm in my parents' driveway. How'd I get here?
Now, where was the car accident at? Where?
It was kind of right in White Plains, New York.
Okay. All right. I know.
So,
I'm a New Yorker, so I know. That's
okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
White Plains.
So,
wow.
And my parents lived in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. And at the time I lived in Lansdale, Pennsylvania. So like 45 minutes away. I don't know why I went.
Pretty far drive after a TBI.
Oh yeah. It was bad. But the history of passing out kind of plays into this because I would have hypoglycemia and I would get really dizzy and then I would pass out. And so when I arrived at my parents' house and I was like, whoa, really out of it, they were like, oh, Laura needs to eat. And so they took me out to dinner. And the first clue that something was really not right was I could not read the menu. It was like everything was swimming. All the letters were like moving all over the menu. And since everything was swimming, I was like, oh, I'll order fish swim. Okay. And so like, that was my logic at the time. So we had dinner and then my mom was like, oh, why don't you spend the night? And so she was like, we'll stop at Blockbuster. We'll get a movie. And we went in Blockbuster and there's all those lights and everything. And I was just like, I almost had a panic attack in there.
Right.
But, again, like I used to get visually overwhelmed. So they weren't putting too much stake in this. But the next day I woke up in my bedroom from high school and I thought I was dead. Like I was in my parents' house and there was no one else there. It was probably like noon or something that I woke up and everything was just dead silent. And I'm in my high school room and I was like, oh, I'm dead. Like I'm having my life review. Like I'm dead.
Oh my God.
And I walked around the house. There's nobody there. I'm like, oh, I guess this is it. I guess I'm like reliving, high school years. And then and mind you, I didn't know anything about near-death experiences at this time. Like that was just like what I was thinking. But they had a graveyard behind their house. There was like this, tree area. But then behind that was a graveyard. And I like graveyards. I used to hang out in them all the time. But so I walked to the graveyard though, because I was like, I'm dead. My grave must be around here somewhere. So I'm like wandering the graveyard looking for my.
What year was this?
98.
Okay.
Yeah. So it was 3 days before my 25th birthday.
Wow.
So and Mars and the sun conjuncted at my midheaven. So it was like, you're changing careers.
Oh my gosh.
So I looked around, I was trying to find my grave or any freshly dug grave. I didn't find one, but then the deer stopped and it looked me right in the eyes. And so I was like, oh, interesting. So the deer can see me. That doesn't necessarily prove that I'm alive, but that deer can see me. And so I went home to my parents' house and I thought, well, all right, I'm going to do an experiment. I'm going to see, can I pick up the phone? Okay, I can pick up the phone. And so I called both of my parents at work and I thought, well, if they both answer and I have a conversation with them, then I guess I'm alive. Like this was like, and so I called them and they were both like, you need to go to the doctor. Like, you don't sound right. You go to your doctor. And so I drove, another 45 minutes to my doctor.
Oh my gosh.
And thankfully I must have had angels around me, protecting me.
You should have been in the ER, like.
Yeah. Well, because I couldn't see, right? Like I had to keep closing my eyes because everything was moving around so fast. And so I got to the doctor and he's like, oh, you have a concussion. You're going to have, 2 weeks off work or maybe a week. I forget what he said. And I started laughing hysterically. And he was like, why are you laughing? This isn't funny. And I was like, oh, I've had concussions before. I've hit my head a lot. And he was like, oh, really? Because they're cumulative. And I was like, well, not that many. But it turned out that so I took a week off work and I was just bored out of my mind because I couldn't read. And I, again, nerdy English major. And so every spring I would read The Sun Also Rises by Ernest Hemingway. And so since I couldn't read, I thought, well, I'll read this book because I know what happens. And so I found if I really tunnel visioned and just focused on the pages and I didn't look up, then I could clear the print. And so I did that, and I was like, I mean, I must have been like that for hours. And I was like, see, I can read, I'm fine. And then I looked up and everything started spinning, and I got such a horrible migraine, and it wouldn't stop spinning. And the next
Did you ever feel nauseous as well?
Oh yeah, I was nauseous.
Were you sensitive to the light?
Oh yeah. Especially fluorescent lights. They were the worst. Yeah. But yeah, I woke up the next day and I thought I was hemorrhaging. Like I had never had a migraine before, and my head was just like exploding, and it felt like the top of my head peeled away and everything turned white.
Gosh.
And like all this energy came down. It was like the tunnel went up instead of forward. And I was like, oh, you exist. I'm not in control. Oh, it was like this very humbling get on path kind of experience. And
Don't come to Jesus moment?
Pretty much, yeah. And then it took 4 years to recover.
So did this lead you into astrology, the medical, intuitive, and into NDE research? Or like how did this, and then explain like how that came about and connected to us?
So I had to drop out of I had to defer my enrollment to Northwestern for graduate school. I did it for a year, and I thought, well, I'll just try to recover. And in that time, I ended up moving back to Bethlehem, not in with my parents, but close by. I met this guy who had been led there from Seattle, and just like dreams and synchronicities, and he wound up in Allentown, Pennsylvania. A friend of mine insisted on setting us up. I was like, I have no condition to date anybody, but I had dreams telling me to like, meet the guy. And when I met him, I had just had a dream about this big dog bowl, like a beagle that was eating out of this huge red dog bowl. And and he said, oh, he picked me up for our date. And he said, oh, I got to feed my dog first. And he pulls out this big red dog bowl. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I just had a dream about that. And I was like, except it was a beagle. And he was like, what do you mean it was a beagle? I was like, oh, there was a beagle in my dream, and it just ate and ate and ate out of this huge bowl. And he said, that's Mrs. Beasley. That was my dog that I had growing up. That's why I got this bowl, because Mrs. Beasley had this big red bowl and she would eat from it. And so anyway, I like dreamed this guy's history. And so I was like, all right, fine, we can go on another date. And
oh my God.
And it turned out that his mom was a nurse and she worked with brain injured people, and he found treatment for me. And so, I mean, it was like one of these things where it was very obviously orchestrated to get together, and then really obviously orchestrated to break up. Like it was
okay, that's pretty deep.
But he was very encouraging of my intuition, and still is. Like periodically I'll hear from him and he'll be like, remember that dream you had in 2010? It came true. And like, so that was very validating. He found this treatment for me in Seattle, and I went there as kind of like my last ditch effort to go to graduate school, with the year delay. And it was a guy who he did craniosacral therapy, visual therapy. He was a holistic optometrist, and he was an herbalist. And
the craniosacral helps with the colic, because my Virgo rising son, when he was born, he was colic the first 6 months, had 2 sessions of the craniosacral work, and then him and his mother, my wife, were able to sleep again.
Oh, wow.
It was he was from when he would breastfeed, he would like instantly, he had digestion issues. She did the craniosacral work, and that helped the colic, and it shifted the digestive tract. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, he also has Ceres and Saturn on the ascendant, so you could understand why all that was playing out that way. Mm-hmm. You don't have that, but it was, oh my gosh, really interesting. And of course, Virgos and Virgo rising, you're dealing with the lower intestine, so
yeah,
that's oof.
Yeah. So the doctor in Seattle was like, hey, if grad school doesn't work out, you can come back here and take over my practice. And I was like, what? And I guess they did an experiment. I was treating 3 times a week, and he's like, yeah, you leave a healing residue in the room. The 3 people after you, they always make a, like massive recovery. And I was like, what? It's you. And he's like, no, we've done tests on this. It's you. And so that was kind of like the first indicator. I mean, I was already doing the medical intuitive stuff sort of by force with the migraines. And, but I moved to Evanston. I tried to go to Northwestern University, had to drop out after, I don't know, like 3 weeks or something. But I lived there for a couple years getting treatment from a different visual specialist. And
were you doing vestibular rehab?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Ocular balance therapy.
Yeah, I went through that after getting valley fever, and it was really just challenging. Oh, gosh.
Yeah.
The dizzy spells were terrible.
Oh, yeah. And I spent many years of my life wearing sunglasses all the time also because of the light sensitivity.
Yeah. So. No, it's strong.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, long story short, I ended up moving back to Seattle. I didn't take over the guy's practice, but he kind of did trades with me where I got to learn all his herbalism in exchange for doing medical intuitive work for his clients. And that validated that I actually knew what I was doing, and became a Reiki Master Teacher. And I don't know, fast forward, because this is a long story. How did I start doing NDE research on astrology of NDEs? I didn't think I was going to be doing this. And I was doing like a cleanse in last fall, and like September of 2023, I was doing a cleanse. And, in the height of like the fasting phase, all of a sudden I was like, oh, I'm writing a book on the astrology of near-death experiences and maybe some stuff about UFOs. And then I wasn't really following through with it. And then everything kind of converged. And I found, actually through Heather, who you've interviewed, Heather Eland, and her teacher, Lynn Coiner, have both done some work on astrology and NDEs. And so they were talking about a particular marker. And I was like, oh, yep, sure enough, I have that in my chart. And those were the points that were pinged at the time when it was like, oh, I have to do this book project. And everything has just kind of evolved. I've interviewed a bunch of really fascinating people now, and definitely I'm noticing patterns. And that was why I ended up contacting you.
And how did you hear or find about me?
A friend of mine who knows that I'm, doing this research actually saw one of your interviews. I don't remember which one it was offhand, but he sent it to me. He was like, oh, you might want to check this guy out. He's also an astrologer, and he had an NDE. And so I was like, oh, well, he'd probably be interested in this research. And so I contacted you, and it was a great call.
Oh my gosh. And so, okay, because that's like a lot. Right. And so I have a bunch of different questions, and I'm so glad you did contact me. And it's fascinating because you did soon after I had just, recently had my medical astrology episode with one of my main astrology teachers, Heather Eland, Astrology with Heather. And she's just a sweetheart and a Virgo like me, Scorpio rising like me. Right. So those type of connections, it's all God, right? There are no accidents, right?
Oh yeah.
But I guess what's fascinating, explain the medical or the healing residue. Because when you said that, I'm like, how did he perceive that? And what was his case study evidence that, like, when you were there, then the next few patients or whatever would start to have growth and healing from their own issues?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how to explain it. This was before I studied Reiki, but I mean, I had a number of instances where not only would I get like the medical intuitive hit about somebody, but sometimes I would sense somebody was in danger or like something was going down, and I would just send energy. I didn't know what that meant, but it was just, I spent a lot of time, like years, lying on the couch with an ice bag on my head. So, a lot of contemplative time, and I didn't have any filter. So, I'm not sure how they exactly conducted the experiment. I mean, it wasn't like an official experiment, but I was really injured and I was trying to get to grad school. And so I had appointments 3 days a week. And it was they would mix it up so that the 3 people after me were never the same 3 people. And what they found was that consistently the 3 people after me would have some kind of major breakthrough in their healing after I had had a treatment in the room. And I don't have an explanation for
Wow. Well, but see, this is where I think we can maybe get into your grand air trine. Pluto Libra second house, obviously you've been married twice. That's a very common, probably more than 80% of my clients, Pluto Libra, have been married twice. But the Pluto second house, when we're dealing with our sixth sense and survival, trining the moon in the 6th house of our daily routine and health, trining the 10th house where but trining the sun specifically, right, by degree. Mm-hmm. And then you also have Mercury, Venus, and what's your 4th placement there? Saturn's
at like 21, 22 though.
Yeah, and so there's some sort of karmic gift, right? I think there too, in terms of your maybe healing hands with the Reiki and your communications. Mm-hmm. And so that may have been even the beginning of accidental Reiki healing. But I think with that grand air trine, that's so funny in terms of your pursuit still for this master's and this rational, logical thinking, right? But, very air sign. But it was really about, I think in some ways, you actually, through your senses and through your transformative, healing energy, even the throat chakra, 2nd house, that you were able to kind of get these medical downloads and even help hit or heal people in public, right? When you were out and about in the 10th house.
Yeah.
And all that stuff was going down. I mean, it's so fascinating. Now, have you found, obviously now, intentionally doing the Reiki healing, give me a story or two, that where you've seen that you've been able to change or lessen pains or actually completely heal something that maybe you have no logical way of the reason why it's happened.
So a lot of people will have me do Reiki if they're going to have surgery. And so I'll do like a third of the Reiki ahead of the surgery, send it to, whoever's going to be doing the surgery. I don't specify because sometimes you don't really know who's going to do it, but whoever's going to do the surgery, guide their hands well. And then during the surgery and then for the recovery of the surgery. And I do this a lot. So, I mean, this is like a general statement, but I would say in most of those cases, the doctors are like, wow, you're healing really well, or, oh, that surgery went so well. We've never had something so easy. And so that happens a lot. Also, a lot of times I'll do Reiki when people are trying to move, like do a home sale. And it will just be like there's kind of uncanny synchronicities that unfold where like just the right person shows up at just the right time. I find that synchronicities are kind of a hallmark of Reiki. It seems to increase the synchronicities in addition to increasing the healing. So yeah, you kind of like the more you do it, the more you're like, oh, there's the Reiki. Like you kind of get that vibe.
Right.
Yeah.
That's really fascinating. Now, do you find that your kind of gifts and abilities tend to work better when you're in active service for others compared to like for yourself or your husband?
Yes and no. I get a ton of information through dreams. I mean, my dreams are precognitive, probably like 5 or 6 days a week. Like things from my dream just like will show up in the TV show that we watch the next night, or like an event.
And do you keep a dream book?
I keep it on the computer now because it's easier to like search for dreams.
So you're able to remember it pretty well. So you have time to go, because some people just lose it so fast. So I tell them, like maybe keep a notepad by the bed, or if they want to cheat, use the voice memo on the cell phone. But for you, like there's very solid distinct
Most
memory.
of the time. Like it unnerves me if I can't remember a dream. I'm like, what are they up to? I call them my dream guys. I'm like, what are they up to? Because if I go through a period where I can't remember my dreams, then like something massive happens. It's like, oh, there was like a lot of behind the scenes work trying to get me to do something that I was going to say absolutely not to. So it's like they do all the dream work behind and then it happened. Like that's how I have a YouTube channel. I didn't want a YouTube channel. I'm very shy. I don't want to be on camera, like any of that. And I went for a week with no dream recall. This was in January of 2023. And I was like, what are they up to? Like, I was like, really. And then I woke up one morning and I was like, oh, I'm starting a YouTube channel on astrology. Oh, okay. And I had like no resistance.
So, wait. All right. So we got to get to that. So, but do you have anything in Leo in the 12th house?
Isis.
So, Pluto, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And
Isis and I think Asbolus, a prophet that like nobody would listen to.
Right.
But nothing major.
This is a good time. Share with the audience your website and your YouTube channel information. It'll be down below in the description. But how can people book Reiki? And I assume you do it remote over the internet as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
The intuitive life coaching and your astrology readings and stuff. Share your information with the audience.
So my website is just it's my blog. It's asklaurabruno.com. So just ASKLAURABRUNO.com. And that's also my YouTube handle, Ask Laura Bruno.
I love that. Okay. Well, I'm going to be going to subscribe to your channel and check all that stuff out because I see for me, I love the, that air trine energy. I just think that's so fascinating. But I got to have a little astrology fun with you for a second. I have some theories about you Gemini ladies. So I want to test it out with you because you are, you're a fellow astrologer and peer, and we definitely have connected on a lot of different ways. So, okay, so my term of endearment for Geminis in general. Now, I do believe that the women have really 4 personalities and the men have 2 or 3, right? Raising a Gemini son, sometimes I feel like I'm raising half Prince, half Kanye West, right? So, but with Gemini women, I find that it takes them to about 30 or 40 years old, somewhere in there, depending on the woman, right? Now, we all, kind of mature the cerebral cortex and the, medulla oblongata is still kind of forming as coincides exactly with the Saturn return, right? Now, women tend to mature 2 to 3 years faster than men, of course, no surprise there. So for you guys, it's more like 25 to 28, and men more like 27, 30, 31, some guys 40, right? Never. Mm-hmm. but so how do you view or how do you feel for Gemini women, like what age or what point, and do you agree that there is like 3 or 4 different personalities within a Gemini woman?
I mean, I don't know if I would call it different personalities like a pathology or something like that, but certainly, I don't know. I haven't ever really framed it that way.
Okay, yeah.
But
yeah, I study Gemini. That's my 8th house, so I've dated quite a few Gemini ladies. So I've done my research papers. So
for Gemini, what I find is that oftentimes there is some internal struggle. Like I had the rational, spiritual, and I mean in my chart that is very evident because my 4 Gemini Mercury and my 6 Sagittarius Neptune. So like I have that rational and intuitive is right there.
Yeah.
So, I find that there's often, the twins, right? But a lot of actors, because Geminis are very, they're like the chameleon of the zodiac. And so a lot of ability.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. A lot of ability to be actors. Also kind of this, does a Gemini ever totally mature? I don't know, because there's like that perpetual child energy too, right? And also the trickster energy, very strong with the Gemini. So that's why I'm hesitating when you're like, well, what would you say? I'm like, yeah, try to pin down a Gemini. It's like, no, you're not going to do that.
Well, that's why I kind of have really come up with that. And maybe my Virgo Mercury, Virgo Sun, and Virgo Stellium puts it more in a container.
Yeah.
To comprehend it, where Gemini doesn't even know what a container really is, right? so that's just the difference of how we would come at it. But also, my loving term of endearment, because I just love the Gemini energy so much, I call Geminis the verbal slut. And I mean it in the best way. But what I think that's great, for example, I need to feel safe and comfortable to be more outgoing, let's say even at a house party. Now, once I feel good, I can dominate and can take over an house party, like in a good way, right? Be the entertainer, all this stuff, right? But the masculine Mercury, Gemini, mutable air sign compared to the receptive feminine, Virgo, Mercury, earth sign. You guys, what I love, and the reason why I say the verbal slut, and this is what's so brilliant about you guys, you're so curious and inquisitive. And people don't realize this, but even you said it and admitted to it, right? Where you may be a little bit more shy, maybe a little bit of an introvert, sun in the sixth. Well, now your sun's in the 10th house, so no. But still, sometimes Geminis can be shy and people don't think that. But you are willing to and love to get input from anywhere, any person, anytime. The Geminis will talk to someone at the pharmacy, at the dry cleaners, at the bank, the homeless person, the billionaire, the cashier, the person at the gym, someone at the gas pump. And so that's what I think that like a Virgo may not do that. Virgo will see somebody and maybe say like a quick hi and smile, but the Gemini will really just engage verbally. And so that's why I call Geminis the verbal slut. And when I see Geminis in action, it just reinforces that little term of endearment for me, because that's what I think makes you guys, right, the Jack and Jane of all trades. Like, you are constantly, and do you feel this in your life, especially with the sun in the 10th house? Do you feel like you're just constantly pulling in and getting, whether it's rational and logical or intuitive, spiritual information and knowledge?
Yeah, well, that's where astrology has been such a gift for me, because I always had that war. But now astrology, I can look at a chart and my rational side will go, oh, yeah, you're right, to the intuitive side. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, I see it now. Okay, carry on. And so it has actually given me a level of inner peace that I hadn't had except during the brain injury. I had a lot of inner peace because all I had was the intuition. But I couldn't function, and like, you need your rational side for some things.
Yeah.
And you need to be able to process visual information and like have short-term memory. And, there's a lot of things that you need that I didn't have. So that wasn't a sustainable way of life, but the astrology has allowed like a marrying of that, Neptune and Sagittarius and Mercury and Gemini opposition in my chart. It somehow has like allowed me to go, oh yeah, okay, that makes sense. The other thing that I noticed, and I don't know if this is just the Gemini or, I mean, you've seen my chart, it's like all mutable, like everything is mutable, right? And so people always think that, like, they just always assume that I am the same as they are. And so like people that have really radical views will talk to me as though, I'm their comrade. And of course I must agree with this. And like, they always assume that like I am coming from whatever position they're coming from. And I find that interesting.
Well, I find with the mutable energy, people can be misinterpreted or mislabeled, but it's almost like, it's like you're in the edge of autumn to winter, the edge of, summer to fall, the edge of spring to summer. And so people, it's like the two-sided coin, you know what I mean? So people see you in a myriad of different ways and find mutable signs and mutable energy extremely relatable. So, and that adaptability, energetically, people pull up on that, and then they just like, oh yeah, oh, you love Trump, oh you love Biden, oh, you love same-sex marriage, you love, what I mean, whatever the phrase or the thought of the day is, they will kind of label that to you, even if you've never even gave an inkling. Right. And like you said, they just assume that. And I think that's pretty fascinating. So, okay. So I want to find out this from you. So, because you kind of mentioned something and I thought it was interesting. Now, where did you or when did you realize that in this healing process that this intuition and this sort of more spiritual side could coexist maybe in everyday existence for you and basis with your rational side? Was it just during the healing process or afterwards, or?
No, during the healing process, I mean, I went through this period where all of these other people were telling me, you're a shaman, you're a healer, you're a medical intuitive. Like everybody had labels for what was happening to me. And I was like, what is all of this? But
oh my gosh.
I needed to get a lot of treatment because the regular doctors didn't know what to do with me. And so I was engaging with all of these alternative treatment providers, and I ended up becoming friends with all of them. And I was like, oh, these people are intelligent. They're not crazy. You know, they're not nuts.
Like homeopathic or naturopathic doctors?
Well, like visual therapy is still kind of fringe. I mean, it's more mainstream now than it was,
Right.
in 1998, but it's still kind of fringe, like colored light therapy, craniosacral therapy.
And it's all so amazing. Oh my God.
Carolyn Mace's work. I got some of her books on audio tape back in the day when it was on tape, and past life work, and all of this stuff, which I was getting the downloads of it. I didn't even believe in past lives, but I'm like, oh, okay, this person's stomach issue is related to something that happened to them in the 7th century, and I share that story, and like their stomach problem goes away. I'm like, all right, well, that's interesting.
Really? So did you get into like Dolores Cannon's work?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I like her work. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep. Yeah, I actually had a really powerful QHHT session, so the quantum healing hypnotherapy, back in November of 2022 with a woman in Grand Rapids. And yeah, that was actually like life-changing for me. So
on the health side or on the spiritual side?
Kind of both. It was very affirming of a lot of things, and I've had really pretty brutal transits for the last several years. I mean, I'm having my Chiron return at the same time that Pluto is conjuncting my natal moon, and my vertex is at 29 Capricorn. So I mean, it's been kind of intense, and my progressions activate all of these things like in a real, like, if you read the generic thing, like, oh, this is one of the worst progressions that you can have. I had like 5 of them at the same time. So it's been kind of challenging, and I've been sort of trying to stay one step ahead of various health issues that my dreams would flag for me. And some of it was like related with relationship with my mother, and things that are, I was always the caregiver. And I was getting messages like, you can't do that anymore. Like you can't.
Well, that's an Aquarius moon archetype. Mm-hmm. So Capricorn moons tend to take care of their mothers when they get older. I know I did it myself. I'm a Capricorn moon for 20 years. And the Capricorn moon does get better over time. But the Aquarius moon, I find, they deal with the kind of the detachment and stuff or whatever. Sometimes strict or mean moms, whatever, and they could be like loving and great moms, but I find Aquarius moons find often that they're in a position where they have to teach their mothers different things about life or guide them and show them the way, you know what I mean? So that makes sense that you say that, because that's, and then it's, almost right there conjunct Jupiter. So yeah, like that's,
yeah. And the Cancer South Node. I mean, that was a big one. So my mom, my sister, and I all have Aquarius moons.
Really?
Yeah. Mine's at 1 Aquarius. My sister's at 5. I think my mom was at like 10 or 8 or something. I forget. But my mom passed in February of this year. And her son was right where the Sun Moon Chiron conjunction was on the April 8th eclipse. So I knew for years, I was kind of like, mom's probably not going to make it through this time period, because she either has to have this massive healing, and like her transits with Pluto were also really brutal.
What was her sun sign?
She was an Aries sun, so
Mm.
like a 18 Aries sun, 17 Aries sun,
Wow.
and that Sun Moon Chiron conjunction 19 Aries. So and then she had Venus and Lilith opposite each other in her chart. Venus at 0 Taurus, Lilith at 0 of Scorpio, and so that Pluto coming up there. I mean, it was just, she was getting squeezed.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I knew, I was like, well, with my sister and me both having early Aquarius moons, like the most literal way that Pluto conjunct moon might play out is like mom's going to die. And it did end up happening that way. So
See, and that's fascinating because I remember we had talked about this because I tend to see Saturn more in transit as indicators of death, but I know that Pluto can be too, even though it's more like, transmutation, transformation, but that transformation could be the dissolving, right, of the parent hitting the moon, your moon, and then stuff like that. But that's really fascinating because for me, the Saturn Aquarius, it was in my 4th house, and that's when I lost my mother while I was in coma. And in her chart, Saturn was in Aquarius in her 12th house. And often I say that for clients as being like the end of the road, for your own chart, where you can have things. So, yeah, I love talking about this astrology with you. So I want to, as we wind down, so where do you feel you are growing towards and your business in terms of, with this after November 19th, the 20-year cycle and transit to 44 of Pluto and Aquarius? And what do you sense, or what are you sensing this energy for the collective? How do you think even the Pluto retrograde during the potential election, or maybe not an election, September 1st to November 19th, but where do you think we are, right? I mean, I know it's a little rough right now. And I try to tell people, right, we're shifting ages, right? Coming out of the Piscean age and the age of Aquarius, that's not going to be an easy transition, and then the human design prophecy is that we're going to leave the solar plexus and go to the heart chakra in 2027. But what are you intuitively sensing for us as our ascension and awakening time? And then even for you, where you want to go and continue to help the collective to heal?
I mean, I feel like 2024 is going to continue to be pretty wobbly. I trust my dreams because I've had them. I had a ton of dreams in 2020 that are now coming true. So I don't know how literal that is going to be, but my sense is that because of Mars activity this year, I think is even more important than the Pluto activity. I mean, Pluto is, yes, going to be re-entering Aquarius on November 19th, kind of for the long haul. I see that period between September 1st and November 19th as kind of like last call for like the, corporatocracy, the oligarchs, the top down. I think that's going to be rough, and especially just because Mars will then be moving. Well, first Mars will be moving through Gemini, but even before that, we have the Uranus and Mars conjunction, right, on July 15th, and which is right at the exact same degree of where Mars was when I had my head injury. So I'm a little nervous about that, to be honest.
Okay, we got to put you in bubble wrap, Laura.
Yeah. I pretty much always get some kind of injury when Mars crosses my midheaven. Like it's like clockwork. I have to be like really careful not to fall down the stairs. Like it's weird. But then with Mars and Gemini, I mean, the US has a lot of placements in Gemini and Cancer, and Jupiter will be stationing retrograde on October 9th on the US natal Mars. But that's also Donald Trump's natal sun degree, his north node, and his Uranus is at 17 of Gemini. So big, US war kind of energy, but also Donald Trump something, right? Yeah. And then when Mars moves into Cancer, Mars is actually going to be in Cancer for a long time because there's going to be retrograde from like 6 Leo back to 17 Cancer. So there's a lot of energy there that, there's going to be this energy with like Pluto in late Capricorn and Mars kind of moving into Cancer. And so
And
Yeah,
we
I
know
think it's going to
Mars
be
in
intense.
Cancer can be pretty intense.
Yeah. Yeah. Mars is not happy in Cancer. And again, the US has a lot of these placements in Cancer. So,
Yeah, the Sun and Mercury and yeah.
yeah. I mean, I'm not a doomer. I've definitely
Yeah.
have seen that there's really positive potential, but it seems like there's sort of like a detour timeline where
A
for
bumpy
some
road
people,
ahead, yeah.
yeah, like some people, I think, trauma is a great awakener. Like I wish that we all just woke up by the nice, happy stuff, but it's usually trauma.
Yes, unfortunately.
So for the people that need that in order to really wake up, I think it's going to be a pretty rough go. But what I've been shown is that for like a lot of people, it's like, oh, come on, you don't need to see this part, or like, oh, let's just like have a picnic, or let's like go over here. So I had one dream where I didn't do that. Like they were suggesting it. They're like grabbing my elbow and being like, come on, come over here. You don't need to see this. And I was like, no, I want to see it. And it was so awful. I'm not kidding. It took me 2 weeks to recover from that dream. It was so horrible.
Wow.
And so since then, anytime someone's like, you don't need to see this, I'm like, okay. Like I'm not. So I do feel like there's a path of grace available, but it's the kind of path where you're living in a state of prayer, you're paying attention to your intuition. You get that little whisper, like turn right, and you turn right, and the street blew up in front of you or something, but you're fine. And I have clients that are in Israel right now. I always have clients where there's like some major hotspot. It's like I always get like the little inside scoop of what's going on there. But it's proven again and again and again, these multiple timelines where, I'll have like 2 clients in a hotspot, and one of them is having just like this amazing kind of like 5D life. And the other one's like, it's hell on earth here. I walk out the door and there's, and so that's always been interesting to me and validating that, like, if you pay attention and you're asking for guidance, it is available. But the thing is, you have to listen to it. If you pray for guidance and you get it and you ignore it, then yeah, this is not a time to do that.
Well, it's beautiful how you say that, and it also makes me think about we just had Neptune join the party of Pluto, and also Saturn retrograde, right? Neptune to December 7th and Saturn to November 15th. But I try to tell everyone, especially with Saturn and Pisces, but I just think in general, we have to keep up our prayer life or our spiritual discipline and practice. And I tell people, you have to do it every day. You can't take a day off. These are wonky, crazy times. And especially Saturn and Pisces, healthy boundaries, compassion and empathy for yourself first and then others, but also your spiritual discipline. I tell people at least do something 15 to 30 minutes a day. I don't care if you're grounding and earthing, you're hiking and walking, you're toning, you're doing guided meditations with Joe Dispenza or whoever, you're doing things with crystals in your bathtub or in the shower, or just being still and quiet. Turn off the technology, but do something. Don't say, I don't have time. That's a lie. We know we all have time. I think, with technology, human beings act like, they can't do anything anymore. And it's like, no. You're choosing not to do that, but you have time. You have 15 minutes in your day to be still, be quiet, and give honor to God, source, creator, however you want to label it, right? Yeshua, Jesus, whatever. But you need to have that spiritual discipline, because I think that's going to really help us to grow and ascend, to really be in the 5th dimension. But also, like you said, seeing the juxtapose, like choose that time. Like I don't choose the 3D timeline. I'm not focusing on fear, anything with the lower chakras. Like choose the positivity, choose the love and light, choose and be in gratitude and joy, and be, like, as I told you, the highest frequency, right, is authenticity. You can only be Laura Bruno, and I can only be Eric Taylor, and that is more than enough.
Yeah.
So this was so much fun, my friend. I could talk to you forever and a day. And I just, what I love, and we exchange this in emails, but what I love is when I meet someone else that loves astrology like I do, but just also the journey, right? The journey of humanity, whether it's good, bad, ugly, or indifferent. how to still stay positive and optimistic, to know the sun's going to shine tomorrow, and to just show up and do the best you can. And I thank you for the work that you do for the collective. And I know your clients probably greatly appreciate you. And I want you to share again as we go and leave everybody with a little positive, optimistic message. You may have scared a few folks, but give them some positive. But share your contact information again. And then, and the floor is yours to leave a parting message.
All right. So my website's asklaurabruno.com, and that's also my YouTube handle, asklaurabruno. So, and as far as positive message, I mean, I like the dreams that I've had, they're very often about the contrast. And I mean, what's available is pretty amazing. I mean, I've seen like really beautiful, healed earth, I think we're going to see a lot of healing technologies come out during Pluto and Aquarius. I think that's going to be a major thing. And then also the U.S. natal Chiron is at 20 degrees of Aries, and that's been getting crisscrossed for, exactly for the last year. But I mean, creeping up on that point. And that's been happening at the same time as the U.S. Pluto return. And so, I mean, things are bad, but I feel like we're mostly through it. And so there is a regeneration that comes with Pluto. If you make it through the Pluto return, like you get the incredible regeneration. And so I feel very optimistic. And with Pluto in early Aquarius, and then when Uranus moves into Gemini and we get Neptune and Saturn in Aries, like that's all harmonious with each other. So, I mean, what we're experiencing now is intense, but it's not sustainable and it's not going to last because a bunch of things are going to be changing signs. And instead of having a bunch of squares, we're going to be getting, trines and sextiles. And I just feel like there's going to be a lot of relief energy.
I like that. Now, a lot of astrologers do get panicky because those are some of the placements with the American Revolution and the Civil War and World War II, the Uranus, Gemini, and Pluto Aquarius markers. But you're right. I feel that it's such technological advancements, which also can be negative and concerning. I tell people, don't put a chip in your hand or your brain.
Oh, no.
Don't, and Project Bluebeam, we have to be mindful of that. I think the technology is so good now that for good or for bad, anything can be possible. You know what I mean? And so, but I choose, I got Jupiter in this ascendant. So I choose the sun's going to shine tomorrow and to be positive, but I'm a realist, right? So, but I choose the positivity, and I am positive that this was such a pleasure and a joy, and just wonderful talking to you and sharing you with my audience. And I know that they're going to, love this and just enjoy meeting you. And maybe we'll have to figure out if you could come back, maybe sort of before the end of 2024, maybe come on live with the audience and interact with people. Because I bet people would really want to tap in to understand some of your medical intuition and downloads. And now, I guess one last selfish question for me, I'm thinking, now, have you found that you have been able to work with people in terms of even seeing ancestors that have passed away or helping them with chronic sickness or illnesses through your Reiki or even through the medical intuition stuff?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the situation. Like some people have a totally spontaneous healing, but that, I would say healing is a process, and it's much more, in my opinion, it's much more about the soul, like the body. When you get symptoms in your body, your soul's been knocking there for a while trying to get your attention. And oftentimes the body will step in and be like, okay, I'll get the attention. And so a lot of times that is a longer process, right? You're like coaxing the healing along. That's where more the intuitive coaching comes along.
Ah,
I prefer to empower people. I'm doing more astrology these days than straight medical intuitive work.
okay.
Just
Yeah.
it's easier for me. Like
Right.
the medical intuitive work can be kind of draining because it's like, oh, I am having to merge with that energy and all of that. And just with the intense transits that I've been having and my mom dying, my husband's father died, like there's just been
Oh,
a lot. And
yeah.
so doing astrology is like just so much easier for
Yeah.
me. But it's often very intermingled.
That's wonderful. Well, this has been awesome and so much fun. And you're always welcome to come back and join me. And listen, you guys reach out to Miss Laura Bruno and get some intuitive life coaching, some astrology, maybe some medical intuition stuff. But this has been great. Thank you so much for coming. And make sure you guys please like and share and subscribe, because you don't know who this could awaken, who this could spark something when you share it to them. Even if they're like, oh, I'm not into any intuitive or astrology, that stuff is foolishness. Well, just try sharing it, because it can make a change, you know. And I thank everybody. This has been episode 224 of my Knowledge is Love Astrology podcast. Check out BigEAstrology.com. Email me, BigEAstrology@gmail.com. Cancer birth chart sales still going on and all that good stuff. But again, thank you. And this has been great.
Thank you.
All right.
All right.
Bye, Miss
Bye.
Laura Bruno, and bye, everybody.